Says recording.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Mallory. Welcome to Lacunaloft's speaker series. I don't even know which video. I used to say which video it was, and now we've done enough of them that I've lost count, which is kind of fun. But we bring in expertise on a variety of topics, always with young adult cancer in mind, to kind of talk us through a topic that we might not otherwise well understand. If you enjoy this, definitely check out lacunaloft.org. We have about 12 programs running right now, so always something for everyone, and always with the focus of just getting young adult cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers together around fun activities and around fun and important information like Michele is going to bring us today. So I'd like to welcome Michele. Thank you so much for joining us. She is going to talk to us today about a cancer diagnosis and how that kind of fits into an education landscape while in treatment and recovery. We have some questions that she's going to answer at the end, so I will kind of let her finish the rest of her introduction and take us away. Thanks, Michele.
Okay, thank you so much, Mallory. Again, my name is Michele Rosenthal, and I serve as a volunteer college and counselor coach. I go back and forth from coach to resource, but I think it's coach. I have been privileged to work in higher education for 30 years, which I don't even understand when I say that, but it's the passing of time. I basically went to college and never left. I thoroughly enjoy working with students, and I've been privileged to work with so many through the years. My college and counselor work, volunteer work, was really, the impetus for that was work that I did with Samantha Eisenstein-Watson, then Eisenstein, who was one of my advisees at Brandeis University when I served as Associate Dean of Undergraduate Academic Affairs there.
Oh, I'd forgotten that you were connected in that way. Such a small world.
Yeah, so I met Sam when she was, Sam from the Sam Fund, when she was a junior and she had just been diagnosed with cancer, and then continued to work with her through her junior year and senior year through her treatment. And through that time, as she was working through diagnosis and recovery, all she wanted to do was complete her degree. And I was so inspired and continue to be inspired by Sam, as we've been fortunate to stay in close touch. She wanted to complete. I worked with her and colleagues to make sure that that happened, and it happened so well, all through her energy and effort. And really through that time, and just I was really inspired by her. And I've been privileged through my career to work with so many students who have been diagnosed with cancer or other critical illness that I just decided that I wanted to really basically be able to leverage my experience. I will say at that time too, it was Sam, in addition to focusing on her studies and her treatment, she had the vision for the Sam Fund, like at that time. And again, I feel privileged to have known her before it all came to be, but just as she was ruminating to think about how she can help other young adults as she was experiencing all that she experienced. So again, it was a really wonderful beginning, and I just applaud her for all of the amazing work that she's continued to do. My career again, oh sorry, Mallory, did you have a...
Yeah, the SAM Fund, just for those who don't know, we are a partner with them. They are a wonderful organization started by Sam, who's Michele has been talking about a little bit, and they provide financial assistance specifically to young adult cancer survivors. And so definitely check out their organization if you haven't seen it already. They do really, really great stuff.
Awesome, millions of dollars, and they rang the NASDAQ bell, so it's
that's right.
Incredibly inspiring work. So again, through my time, and I have served in the early years, I worked in residential life at Mount Holyoke College. I served as an associate dean at Brandeis, and worked at Babson College and many colleges within the New England and Mid-Atlantic area. And currently I serve as the Director of Academic Advising for the College of Professional Studies at Northeastern University. So I've served in direct advising, direct work with student roles, and also administrative roles. And so as a college and counselor coach, just because, again, I've been privileged to just know so much, my work is really about helping students navigate. What I continue to find in working with young adults who have been diagnosed with cancer, which is kind of the last thing that anyone would expect, is so many are just high achieving young adults who have gone through their early education, working through their lives, and have really never asked for support before. So then a cancer diagnosis happens, kind of in the middle of or at the beginning of all of the excitement about thinking about, quote unquote, the best 4 years of one's life. And the question often is like, how do I make this happen? And so what I want to share with you is just, and I will respond to some questions that have been asked, just kind of in my best judgment based on experience, what I really think is best. And as I've worked again and have kind of names and faces in my mind as I have the privilege of talking with you today, what has really worked best for them as they navigate treatment, possibly time off, possibly no time off and treatment to be successful on their college journey. So the first thing I'd like to share in terms of what's most important is creating a network. And I will say, you know, and I have a bias because I've been in higher education for as long as I have, and again, never left college, is that there are really wonderful people on college and university campuses who are there to help and there to provide support. The challenge sometimes is every college and university has all of these wonderful people, but they're really hard to find because titles are different from campus to campus, offices are different from campus to campus. And again, if you're a student who's never asked for any kind of support or help before, it just feels like a maze of people and not quite sure who to ask. So I think the most important thing to keep in mind, and action, and I think action is a really important part of this. I often find that students really do, even with the best support and best help, no one knows what a young adult with cancer is experiencing except for a young adult who's experiencing cancer. And so advocacy is an incredibly important part of this journey and should not be minimized in any way. And I'm happy to talk with individuals about that at later points, again, if I can be helpful. But with that said, creating a network that feels most comfortable for you is really, really key. The network can include one of your professors. It can include the Director of Disability Services and Support, and I'll talk more about that person and office in a bit. The Director of Health Services, maybe a counselor from the counseling center, maybe your class dean or your academic advisor, maybe resources from the Office of Student Affairs. And my maybes, or my preface maybes, are about being choosy. So I think even, and again, the best of circumstances where you're really kind of feeling okay, it's a roller coaster, and where you might feel okay one day or 1 month, treatment may change and maybe not so much. Or there might be times where you need kind of different levels of support. And so I think having that network in place, kind of just in case, and also really a group of people that you feel like you can talk with is really incredibly important. I think that often in situations like this, we often feel like we're the only one, and it is about our experiences. It's about your experience. All of these individuals that I've mentioned or offices have worked with students who have been in similar situations. So you can expect or should expect an empathic response and a sensitive response in terms of, again, what the next steps might need to be. But having a group, so you know, if you have a question, you know that if there's kind of a potential change in your plan, you know that you have a group of people to go to. So going back just for a couple of moments, as I say, one of your professors, that's kind of obvious. It would be someone who is teaching a class, easy to find. And again, it might not be all, but just one person that you feel comfortable with. And so I'm thinking about over the course of a semester, for example. Director of Disability Services and Support, I would say that's one of the first people that you should be talking with. Disability Services and Support offices provide accommodations. And so as a young adult, as a student diagnosed with cancer, based on the diagnosis, that can be a range of accommodations. It might be extra time for an exam. It might be taking an exam for an example in a separate location if you feel that you're easily distracted based on, for example, how medication might be affecting affecting you. It might be transportation. If your disability manifests in physical systems and you're on a large campus and it's really very hard to navigate. That's a person in an office, generally easy to find. Often it could be within the student affairs area. As you look on a website and look at student services, it might be under the provost area. As you look again on a website and look under kind of academic affairs. But if you just like click Google, or go to the website and put in disabilities, that person in that office should be pretty easy to find. And you'll definitely want them to know right away. Typically what that office will do, and this is significant, is will provide, that's the office that would provide accommodations. They will ask for medical documentation. So you know that. And these processes, as you would expect, take a little bit of time. So if you are listening to me now, it's early in the summer, planning to start school in the fall or to continue in the fall, I would say now is not too early to make sure that you make that contact. So the person or persons that are going to be reviewing that information have time to review and then to work with you to provide whatever the appropriate accommodation might be. Typically what happens then is that, and again, every campus differs, but this is fairly standard, in that you would be provided a series of letters. And the letters would be to your faculty. So the office would not, your professors, the office would not provide those letters. You would. And I would say in the first class or within that first week, I would encourage you to think about visiting your professors separately, office hours, as opposed to after or before class, so you can talk with them about that accommodation that will then be required. So again, if it's extra time, if it's tutoring support, if it's low distraction area for a test example, they would know that in advance and would work with you accordingly. Director of Health Services, often the Health Services Center would work closely with the Disability Office. So again, just another office to notify, and or based on what your treatment plan is, you might have medication that maybe would be stored in the health center, for example, or maybe would be administered by the health center. And obviously there's a huge spectrum of the type of support an office like Health Services would provide. But again, that would be an early contact in the spirit of your network. I noted counseling center. I think that's important, and I think it's important because in any circumstance, in any situation, I think college and university life, at least in my experience, it's not getting any easier. I think it's getting increasingly complex. I think the demands are very, very high. Being a student who's experiencing cancer, I think just to have another person that you can talk with just for confidential support, again, is really key. Your academic advisor, in the best of circumstances, is someone that you'd be working with through your undergraduate experience, through your graduate experience, because there may be points, and I'll speak more about this in a bit, where you might need some modification to your academic plan. Your academic advisor really would be one of your very best advocates. Important. Student services, if you were planning to live on campus, for example, and living on campus meant that because of your treatment, because of your own comfort, you wouldn't want a roommate, or you would want to make sure that the residence hall that you were living in was close to your classes. Residential life most often falls under the umbrella of student services. So having contact with the dean of students, having contact with the director of residential life, really key again in terms of that network. And again, be choosy. You might meet someone and not feel comfortable with them. You don't need to go back finding someone else. And again, that's about you being a good advocate and you knowing best the kind of support and the kind of people that you are most comfortable with.
Gosh, this is such great information. I know we still have some time to go, but I had a very negative experience. I was diagnosed while in grad school and had a very negative experience with the people who were kind of in charge of me within my department, and I just didn't realize that something like disability accommodations was something that I was definitely allowed and and something that I needed to hunt out, because no one otherwise in power, kind of in my situation, was willing to be compassionate as I gained a little bit of distance from treatment. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit too, that like sometimes treatment ends and we still see some of these effects for a year or two afterwards that could affect studying and amount of time needed and things like that, especially when a lot of cancer diagnoses, not all clearly, but a lot of cancer diagnoses include, you know, solely internal kind of trauma. I had a friend very darkly suggest that if I had lost my dominant hand, that like that might have gained me a little bit more like, oh no, this is still something this person is grappling with. But I looked fine to them, and they just, oh, this is such great information, Michele.
Well, that's why I think the contacting these key offices immediately is so important, because then they'll know from the beginning, right? And so, you know, Mallory Kasparian entered master's or doctoral program at this point, was diagnosed, we have this information, then you're not seen. You know, I mean, ideally, you would have an advisor who would be kind of just checking in on you in the way that they would be checking in just about your academic progress. But if things flare up again, or as you said, you're just continuing to experience results of chemo brain or kind of whatever it might be, at least it's on record, right? And then it's, you know, you might not be meeting with that network of people all of the time, but it's folks that are in the know, and then ideally, you know, the support continues. But the advocacy piece in there is just so important. Our campuses are large. I think, unfortunately, because of shifts in higher education, budgets are often smaller than we would hope they would be, and staffing is not as large, despite sometimes what you hear in the media about levels of administrative staff and how that's affected higher education. In my experience, again, wonderful people staffing really wonderful offices, often beleaguered given the numbers of the issues that come up among our students. So advocating, you know, and kind of always being kind of out there and present and making sure that your person or your persons, maybe it's two, are there, right? And then if there's turnover, people leave, they go on to other institutions and secure other positions, that you are known, right? And so at a point, potentially, Mallory, where you're just not feeling well again, you don't have to start all over. And with that said, did I answer your, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great.
Thank you. Thinking about your academic plan is very, very important. Again, these are the kinds of things that most students wouldn't necessarily know if they've not necessarily needed to ask for these kinds of allowances before. And again, this will be called something different from campus to campus, but there are academic underloads. There are reduced course loads that students, so a traditional undergraduate may begin needing to take 4 or 5 courses with permission and support from the Office of the Registrar, with support and permission from an academic advisor. Students can request a reduced course load. Important to be aware of how that might affect financial aid, for example, because there might be an effect there, but it's an important question. So with an approved accommodation, with an approved disability accommodation, an academic underload, or again, a reduced course load might be perfectly appropriate. And you know what happens, or what may happen, and this has been true for many students with whom I've worked, again, in that kind of high achieving mindset of I'm fine, I can do this, and I just want to finish, which is the mindset of many who are just incredibly kind of inspired, and again, just high achieving young adults. Sometimes it might be fine to begin with a full course load, whatever that might be, but giving yourself permission to cut back if cutting back means that you can take better care of yourself, if the treatment plan has changed and you're exhausted, if the treatment plan has changed and you're nauseous, if the treatment plan has changed and you're just needing a bit of a break. Again, starting at the beginning, but knowing that you can cut back. And this is why having folks like your class dean or academic advisor. And again, the disability office is aware. So if you're needing to make that change, ideally you would have support to make that kind of change. There really are many academic allowances that can be made. And I would say there really are exceptions to every rule. Absolutely. And appropriate accommodation is important. And again, it's why, I know I'm repeating myself a bit, but it's so important to make sure that the institution has information up front. So when you're potentially asking for some kind of allowance, it's part of the story, right? And then there's increased sensitivity to why you may be asking for what you're asking for. Lots of wonderful resources on campus, many that I've mentioned. I just want to mention a few others. Living on campus really might be a wonderful option based on, there are so many, through the years, housing has changed so much, where it used to be just standard rooms and standard doubles. Now there are suites. Now there are more bathrooms. There are just different ways to live on a college campus. If you're starting as a new first-year student and you're told that first-year students are all in triples, and the thought of living with 2 other people, especially experiencing whatever your treatment plan might be, talking with, again, the director of residence life, in the spirit, again, that accommodation would be very important. I mentioned a class dean or an academic advisor. That kind of term can be interchangeable. I've mentioned the dean of students, again, individual faculty, counseling center and health center staff, definitely financial services in terms of your plan, what it might mean, your academic plan, what it might mean if you cut back is very, very important in terms of scholarships that you might have and how gaps might need to be filled. Again, especially if you needed to take some time away, which is fine, and many students do that. They take time, they might take a semester off, they might take a year off and decide to come back when things are feeling better, and that works out well. It's helpful to have financial services looped in. I mentioned the Office of the Registrar, and again, key office, Office of Disability Services and Support. I think too, and some, depending on, I'm going to talk a little bit about social and co-curricular life, and Sam popped into my mind again. I remember that, it was probably her senior year, getting ready to graduate. And I just, she was definitely in pretty intensive treatment, but she came back and she sang with her a cappella group, because she sang a cappella while she was an undergraduate, and she did everything that she could to continue. I can think about many other students whom I've worked with, and I won't name names. I just feel comfortable talking with Sam because she's given me all sorts of permission, but who have definitely continued to stay involved in campus life, or again, as a new student, have chosen just maybe one thing to connect with, to be part of the full community, which I think is really, really important. So it's thinking about what and who are important to you, again, in terms of the kinds of social connections, the outside of class connections that you might want to make. I think it's important to consider friendships. Definitely many students with whom I've worked have told me that their friendship circles have changed post-diagnosis, that a group of friends who they thought were kind of friends for life didn't quite understand the diagnosis, weren't quite sure how to respond to the diagnosis, and like slowly remove themselves from that person's life, where others all of a sudden were there in ways that were totally unexpected. So considering friendships, considering who your confidants might want to be, and this is my bias, but I don't think it should be everyone, but confidants, people that you really think that you can trust, and that will really be there to support you through your time in a college or university experience. And really just thinking about outlets that are really important to you to stay connected. I think college and university life is incredible. It should be incredible for all, and there should be ways to connect. And again, depending on the institution that you're at in terms of how much exists, that absolutely varies. But that's where an office like a dean of students office or a student activities office can be really helpful, just to make sure that you have others to connect with that have similar and common interests that have nothing to do with your cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, that's great. There are so many tidbits of information here. This is absolutely wonderful, Michele. And that importance of kind of understanding that one's friends group might shift a little bit. I know I hear again and again, as you said, that's kind of a difficult thing to go through, but it's definitely to be expected when we think about a peer group who has never been through something like cancer before. Sometimes they can deal really well, and sometimes they need a little bit of space, and just kind of knowing that that's not about, that's not about the person diagnosed. That's definitely about the stress of the situation, I think is really helpful.
So the other thing I would like to share, so through the years, I've been asked many questions by young adults, and what I decided to do was reach out to colleagues from a number of different areas that I really see kind of as experts, be it faculty or deans of admissions, or directors of residence life. And I just want to share, and I call this voices. So I just want to read to you just a couple of, maybe a couple or three responses I've gotten that, as I've shared this before, students have found really, really helpful. So if I can, I'd just like to take a few moments to read a couple of things to you.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it kind of begins, and again, with the kind of voices, I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, but I've learned so much about myself through this diagnosis, and I want to tell my story. And this is a common question for someone that's thinking about applying to college and just we have to write an essay and aren't sure what to say. I don't want anyone to misunderstand, but I may need some on-campus support, and how do I ask? So I want to respond to the first, which is, I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, but I've learned so much and I want to tell my story. And so let me read a couple of responses. So this is a former director of admissions from a four-year liberal arts college. And this person says, when meeting a prospective student through either personal essay or interview, I'm most convinced by those students who can talk about personal issues, health, poverty, abuse, in ways that recognize the difficulties in dealing with hardship without defining themselves as victims. They tend to acknowledge the past and perhaps the present as part of their history, and within that, describe their plans for the future. For me, that acceptance often seems to spawn a resilience that returns or carries the student forward on a successful path to college, life, and beyond. Another vice president for admissions and enrollment at a four-year business college said, this is a great question, and from my perspective, I think the admissions essay provides an exceptional opportunity for students to be able to talk about perspectives, obstacles, determination, challenges, resolve, and so much more. I always tell our applicants that the personal statement is a way for us to learn more about the unique aspects of their lives. They should not feel that telling their story would be viewed negatively in the college process. How they frame the statement is important. It's a significant part of their life's journey to this point. I'm sure none of them would want to define themselves or all future opportunities by their cancer, but we'd be foolish to think that having cancer won't be with them forever. Telling their story through their lessons learned, obstacles overcome, or even continued challenges on an ongoing basis will help us to better know them as individuals, which I always argued is part of a college essay. And I think that, to me, it just resonates so strongly. And I just think it's the reminder that this is a piece of your journey. It's a significant piece of your journey, but it's not your full journey, right? And so thinking about crafting whatever you might put together, it's a piece. You shouldn't be ashamed or feel fearful that you would not be accepted because this is a piece, but thinking about how this piece has affected and is in part of, again, your full story. And I want to, another question was in preparation for a request about an on-campus housing accommodation. And I asked the director of residential life, again at a four-year liberal arts college, and they said, if a student requests a single because they might not be ready to expose all of their medical care in a room, we would encourage and support them through our accommodations process. They are encouraged to ask for what makes sense for them and what support their success and how it relates to their medical condition. Just call us. And again, that goes back to what I said earlier about the more you can do sooner, the better. And as you would imagine, like any process, like as it gets closer, these offices, residence life, dean of students, accommodations, health services, counseling, are hearing from what feels like everyone, like on college campuses. It's like as soon as like August comes, it's like mayhem. So again, back to advocacy, the more that you can do sooner, the better. And I wanted to share, I think one more comment here. Yeah, so this was in preparation for a conversation with your professor, and that can feel incredibly intimidating. And you know that this person is responsible for your grade, and students have sometimes told me that they're concerned about someone feeling sorry for them, or they're concerned about any kind of retribution at all. So in preparation for a conversation with your professor, this is a tenured faculty and department chair at a 4-year research university. The what should I tell my professor answer would depend on the student and the professor. My first advice is that the student goes to see the equivalent of an academic services office. There are staff advisors who are precisely there to help with this kind of situation, to help the student decide what kinds of accommodations might be needed and how best to communicate with the faculty involved. Sometimes the academic services or academics advising staff or counselor will be the one to communicate with the professors. This can be a vague or detailed message, the letter that I was talking about earlier, depending partly on the student's wishes, but basically communicating that this is legit. Or sometimes the staff or counselor advisor there will recommend that the student speak directly to the professor. Most professors will be much more familiar with cancer and less shocked by a cancer diagnosis than the student. So I think students can be reassured that professors will respect and understand the student and his or her situation, and also not dramatically change his or her sense of the student's identity. I think oftentimes, and I think this is true for many situations, the buildup that we feel and anticipating how to have the conversation is much more intense than the conversation will actually be. And if you try and someone's a jerk, honestly, like find someone else, right? Because like that's not okay. But I think generally, as this person has said, you will find empathy, you will find support, you'll probably often hear a story because we know cancer diagnosis is not uncommon and it affects all of us in a myriad of ways. So my best guess and hope is that you will find an empathetic, empathic, and supportive response.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Michele. Those real world examples were really helpful.
Yeah, no, happy to share, and they're all verbatim responses. So yeah, again, good people, and for me, that's a really wonderful example of, again, good people that have perspective, that enjoy working with students, that really want to be as helpful as they can, and that a cancer diagnosis should not mean that a college and university experience is not one that young adults with cancer should think they cannot be part of, or they have to remove themselves from, or they have to wait. It will be different, but it can definitely be navigated with appropriate support and appropriate advocacy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we have some questions that have been submitted from our audience. Okay, number one, I cannot go back to my field after cancer diagnosis, and I've always wanted to get my master's, so I thought this would be the perfect time to go back to school. What's the best way to deal with chemo brain so that it doesn't ruin your grades?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say, again, in preparation, once accepted, it would definitely be talking with the disability office to think about the kind of accommodations that you might need. So again, things actually might be easier than you anticipate. And so maybe, as noted before, you might start with a full course load, but maybe go down to a reduced course load and have accommodations in place. The important piece about accommodations that I didn't note earlier is you might have an accommodation like low distraction testing, or more time for an exam, extended time. You might decide that you don't need that. So because you have an accommodation in place, that's available to you, but it doesn't mean that you have to access it, right? But the important thing is if you anticipate that memory is going to be a concern, and that again, you would need more time, definitely having that accommodation in place. So if in fact you do need it, it's in place and there for you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Okay, our second question. Earning an academic degree requires planning and individual progress. A coworker can't fill in for the work you missed due to cancer treatment like at most jobs if you're in school. That's very true. How can students cope with these planning and progress demands, particularly when facing long-term projects such as a thesis or dissertation? So we're talking about graduate school again, probably.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think working with, so I would say starting, right, working with your academic advisor, working and doctoral programs, faculty are often just very closely involved, working with faculty and your academic advisor very closely to come up with a plan that is realistic. But the key there is coming up with a plan that's realistic as opposed to just not stepping in. You have to step in. Yeah. And, again, it waxes and wanes. Your energy might surprise you once you're motivated in a very different way, or you're kind of back to the academic arena. But it's definitely something that I would talk with your faculty and your advisors, your faculty advisor about right away to figure out, okay, like what's realistic here, given my circumstance. I might begin as everyone else. I might need to pull back. What might be best? Based on the time of year, based on the medication, based on your condition and how you're feeling, and then obviously what the expectations of your faculty advisor are.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, some self-advocacy too. I had an advisor who for the month in between my diagnosis and starting treatment, he wanted us to act as if nothing had happened. And I remember looking at him like he was an alien. That suggestion was crazy to me.
Yeah.
But I did not feel at the time empowered enough to be like, maybe we can compromise a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But it would have made my life much, much better if I would have just, spoken up for myself about what my needs were.
Yeah, it's not, it's easier said than done. And to your point, Mallory, absolutely needed.
Yeah. I think our last question you have already answered, but I will read it anyway. Where can one go in the college setting to receive HR type of support or learn what their disability options might be? But I think you've spoken a little bit to that
definitely
already.
Disability office. And again, it might be called, a different office. On some campuses, it might be located within the health center. On some campuses, under the umbrella of student affairs, others under the umbrella of academic affairs. But know that, and this is really like shifted through the years, where disabilities on many campuses, like learning disabilities, physical disabilities, especially learning disabilities, like not even talked about, and now absolutely. So accommodations are like far and wide. Staff exists. It might be a smaller office, might be a bit larger, but it should be easily found. It's just from website to website, from college and university to college and university, just navigating. And often, if you can't find it, the best office to call would be a dean of students office. That office should easily be able to point you to where that type of service exists.
Yeah, I'm taking a couple of notes.
And if you call, and with all due respect, I love students, but if you have, a student answers the phone and doesn't seem to know, you might ask, well, can I make an appointment just to talk with a staff member, maybe a dean of students or an assistant dean of students, just to make sure that the person who answers the phone or answers the email really understands the question that you're asking and why you're asking that question. And again, I'm focused on summer. As summer gets busier and busier, it gets a little harder. So definitely start early and do, as Mallory pointed out, everything you can do to advocate and just make sure that your question is really understood and what you're looking for is really understood.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, your thoughts on creating a network of people, but being careful about them, because sometimes someone is not going to have the right idea about what we're experiencing. I was told that talking about my anxiety, for instance, in a letter advocating for myself made me look weak. And that's just not true. Yeah, it made me look weak. So I couldn't use that when advocating for myself. That was something I needed to take off the table. And like, that's not true.
No, you should be able to tell your story. And again, the finding your person, I credit Grey's Anatomy. I can mention Dan Shapiro. But finding your person is really important. And again, it might be your class advisor, it might be a professor, another member of the faculty, it might be someone in the dean of students office, but finding your person, that when something like Mallory's example happens, you have someone on campus to be able to talk that through and think about either how they can help advocate or they can help you reframe what you want to put forward, so you're sure at every turn that your voice is actively put forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that's such good advice, helping you reframe, because when you're in it, I think it can easily feel like so much and so intense, and having someone help kind of smooth out what that story is to kind of help you. Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you're, and at a time that you're feeling like crap, pardon me, but just kind of weak and tired, and just want to focus on what you want to focus on, it's, it's a whole nother level, right, of conversation and advocacy at a time where you might not be feeling your best. And that's why, again, starting earlier, try to advocate when you do feel your best and you feel strongest. So then when something else sets in or you get like bad advice, your story is kind of already out there to the most appropriate people, your person or persons.
Gosh, Michele, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg of all the expertise that you have. So maybe I can talk you into coming back again. But thank you so much. This is such a relevant topic when we're talking about a young adult cancer population, in terms of both undergraduate but also graduate kind of studies, going back to work or going back to school, or starting school, in the middle of all of this. So thank you so much. Do you have any kind of last words?
No, I would say thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful work that Lacuna Loft does. It's been really fun to learn about you, Mallory, and to learn about all that you've done over the years. I think it's amazing, and really kind of sheds a different kind of light and opportunity for young adults. So that's awesome. Again, I serve as a volunteer college and cancer coach, so folks should be free to be in touch with me. I'm happy to help at any point, and really it's just about like navigating the landscape. So Mallory, you can feel free to share my email address, and again, I'm happy to help in any way that would be most helpful. It's Michele Rosenthal, 1L and Michele, at verizon.net.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.